Coming to paperback and e-readers, Steam Season of the Witch Girl. The aspiring angel takes on a wicked teenage witch in this action-packed all-new Steam series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Steam Season of the Witch Girl at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. Before I get into this review of Pumpkin number 4, I wanted to give everybody an update on the SJS Direct 2025 catalog. Now, the SJS Direct 2025 catalog is going to launch on March 21st with John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side, and you can pre-order that book in digital format on Amazon's Kindle or other online booksellers like Google Play or Draft the Digital and its affiliates like the Apple iBookstore and Barnes & Noble. And on April 25th, I'm going to be launching a Steam Season of The Witch Girl, and that book has a fantastic Bill Walko cover that pays homage to the legendary John Romita cover for Amazing Spider-Man 39, and that book will be available on April 25th at Amazon on Kindle if you pre-order it digitally and in paperback, and you can also pre-order a copy at other online booksellers like Barnes & Noble and Draft the Digital. And I'm currently editing Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer, and that book will be the first SJS Direct book to feature art in the interiors, and that book will be something that I designed to be similar to the light novels that are sold in Japan and Korea, and it's designed to be similar to those kinds of books. However, this book will be a big one at over 600 pages, and it's one that I really enjoyed writing, and I can't wait to share with you, hopefully by this May. And I really wanted to get an ISIS series book out here. Unfortunately, I just didn't have an idea for a story, and rather than rush a story out, I decided to, again, maintain a standard of quality and not release a poor quality ISIS book and wait until I had a good idea for a story, and that's why there is no ISIS book this year. However, I'm currently putting fingers to the keyboard on an ISIS series story called ISIS Runway of Doom, and hopefully I'll be able to get that story out to readers sooner rather than later. Now, as I've been going out here working on my own books and trying to get my own books to the marketplace, I've been out here checking out a lot of great indie comics like those from Obscura Comics, and I've been really enjoying their Pumpkin series, and this Pumpkin series is a lot of fun, and it really reminds me of horror movies like Scream and many other horror movies that I grew up watching in the 80s and the 90s. And the Pumpkin books have been the best comics I have read of the last couple of years. Been really solid storytelling all about the story of Paige, this awkward girl who basically wanted to fit in but wound up being betrayed by people who she thought were her friends, very similar to what happened to a character called Carrie in a movie I saw many years ago. And this story has been very entertaining as it's been going along. And the story has been going along at a very good pace as related to storytelling, with the first 3 issues establishing the main character in Paige, and what she wanted to have is revenge against these popular kids who've betrayed her. And I really cared about this story, and it really was going really solid until about this 4th issue, where there were really serious issues with the overall overall pacing. Now, when it comes down to this book, it was a very good story. However, it was just bogged down by story elements as related to a second act. And this is where I really wanted to make this video, because again, I want to go out here and start holding the comics in my hands when I do these reviews, so that people can see these comics, because the best way to read a comic is in the hand. However, I really wanted to go out here and use this book to teach a lesson about how the second act can basically slow down a story. Now, this book starts out with a great cover as related to this digital issue. I love the contrast here of the popular girl with the angel costume and Paige with looking like a demon. Great contrast here as related to telling this story. And if you have a cover like this and it tells a great story, it's really going to grab the reader and make them really pick up that book and get them excited about things. That's really going to get people into the story, because this girl's, again, completely unaware of the threat of Paige the pumpkin, and everything on this cover would, if you put this on a comic store shelf, this would be a book that would basically sell just on the cover alone. And this is really solid cover work here as related to storytelling, and I'm impressed with this. Again, just really solid storytelling, and I wish that the story was as strong as it was in the interior as it was in the cover. But what happens here is what happens to a lot of new writers and writers who are just starting out, in that they have a issue with their second act. Now, when it comes down to this book, again, the story is pretty solid, but by Sun Kamahaki, Garth Madamus, and Justin Robtard, they do a great job with it, and Garth Madamus does a great job with the script, but they just have a little bit more to learn about writing second acts in stories. Now, the book starts out with an opening sequence of Mouse after she's seen the death of another one of the popular kids, and she's going to the police station for help. And as she's going to the police station for help this Halloween, as related to the death of another one of her friends, this is where the police come in. And as the police are coming in, as related to this second act of the story, this is where the story starts to introduce some new characters in these police officers, and this black male police officer, Anton Bradley, who comes into the story. And as he's coming into the story, this is where the police are looking to get involved, as Paige is going across town looking for her next victim. Now, this is where the police dismiss Mouse and leave Mouse all to herself. And as they leave Mouse all to herself, I don't want to give away too much of this comic, because I don't want to take, because people work hard on these books, and I don't want to take away from their hard work. No, I don't want to take away from any of their hard work. However, there was a great page here as related to Mouse running into Paige, and this is where she lets her know that it's just not her turn yet. Now, I don't want to give away too much, again, of this story, because the pumpkin story here is very interesting as related to this girl and her having this panic room that she thinks is going to protect her from Paige. However, we see that that's not really going to be the case, and unfortunately, as the creators of this book were trying to make that point, sadly, with this story, the kill here isn't as creative as the first three issues, and that was a bit of a disappointment to me. And the reason for that kill not being as creative basically is because the writers are starting that second act of this story, and that's a place where a lot of writers really get their hands tied. They get their hands tied in the second act because they're trying to build up that rising action, and as they're trying to build up that rising action, they're trying to add details to the story to basically, again, fill out the plot and make things make sense to everyone. But sometimes if you are inexperienced, you can wind up bogging down your story, and your story can wind up getting slow, and you don't see how that's basically, again, keeping a good story from really being great. I mean, I've seen this with movies like The Last Dragon, which really is a great movie. Berry Gordy did do a great movie, but the second act kind of slowed it down. And the same thing is happening here with Pumpkin. And again, if you're not a seasoned writer like myself, it will slow you down. However, there are ways to, again, speed up the story and get the pacing to move so that the reader can stay engaged. And this is something that I learned when I was out here back about 2013, 2014, working on a story for the ISIS series called ISIS Wrath of the Cyber Goddess. Now, for the story ISIS Wrath of the Cyber Goddess, I wanted to follow up on the story points in Isis the Beauty Myth, and as I wanted to follow up on those story points in Isis the Beauty Myth, I wanted to show how the Rahima character got transformed into a cyber goddess, a digital diva, and looked to take on Isis, but I wanted to make sure that the action moved very quickly, and that's where I invented a way to create a faster second act. And this faster second act, again, builds on plot point number one of the story that ends the first act and allows the reader to come into that second act, move the story along, and as it moves its story along, we can move quickly into the third act and build into the climax and eventually build into a conclusion in a faster way that allows the reader to, again, not feel like the story is slowing down in any way, shape, or form. And again, that basically moves the story much faster, and if you can move the story faster, you can get the reader more engaged in the story, and as the reader gets more engaged in the story, they can finish the story quicker and start anticipating the next story. That's what I learned how to do with the Isis Wrath of the Cyber Goddess story, which moved the Cyber Goddess saga along as related to the stories of the beauty myth, Wrath of the Cyber Goddess, and Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. And ever since then, I've been using that story model in my work for the last couple of years, and I used it to basically wrap up the Esteem series' first overreaching arc, because when it comes down to the second act, when in serial stories, again, when you're doing an overreaching arc, you really don't want the second act to slow the story down. And that's what's happening here with Obscura Comics Pumpkin. You have, with these first three issues, again, those first three issues of this overreaching arc basically started moving the story quickly, but this fourth issue basically slowed it down because we're getting into this second act. But you really, if you know how to pace your stories, you can make it where this second act basically moves real quick, and you can start moving into the third act and eventually start wrapping your book up as related to the conclusion of the overreaching arc. And the faster you, again, move the second act, the faster you can conclude the overreaching arc. And again, this is something I learned with the Isis series, and then later on with the Esteem series, what I did with a story, I started to see, okay, Act 2 is wrapping up, Plot Point 2 is wrapping up, and basically look to wrap up the story, because I did, like, I think about 8 Esteem books, and again, it wrapped up with, the second act wrapped up with The Witches of Eastland, and that's the story that's going to be followed up with Season of the Witch Girl, and The Witches of Eastland basically wrapped up the story of Esteem as related to the end of the second act, because that's the story where Esteem basically learns to become comfortable with her human face, and that basically led to Esteem Ascension, which was the conclusion of the first overreaching story arc. And again, there's ways of telling a story, but it takes years to, again, develop those skills and learn this craft. That's why I say comic book writing is a craft, because again, learning how to work story arcs and make it where they can go from issue to issue, because each issue is a part of an overall 3-act story. And again, Pumpkin's first act basically, again, ended in the third issue, and now we are in this fourth issue. And again, this fourth issue really is, again, a little bit slow. The story is good, but it is a little bit slow. And again, the kill wasn't as creative as the previous books. I mean, the previous books had a little bit more creativity, but we get a very, again, good conclusion of this comic. Again, the conclusion is really solid, and again, it's really solid because we get, again, some revelations as related to these new characters. We get some really revelations as related to Paige, and again, I don't want to give away all of the story, but everything from after, in spite of the slowness, is solid here. It's a book I would recommend. And I would recommend you pick it up because it moves the story along. But for the writers, I want them to understand, when it comes down to pacing, you gotta really, again, watch it, because it can really bog a book down. And again, bogging a book down can basically cost you readers. It can cost you readers because people don't really like it when stories slow down. But there's ways around that. If you get a bit more experience about stories, you can learn how to move that along. And that's something I've learned, and I apply it to most of my books ever since about 2014. Every book I've written since 2014, I've applied this whole approach, and I applied it in my own first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door. When I wrote John Haynes at Death's Door, I wrote that as a story that's contained in one volume, but is in 3 acts, and is in a way that basically, again, moves that second act very quickly so that we can get to the third act with Thanatos confronting John about death. Again, I try to make sure that I keep the story moving quickly, because I know that when it comes down to readers, that you want to keep the audience excited, you want to keep them engaged, and you don't want to go down here and slow down anything, because if you slow it down and the reader gets distracted, they start to drop your series. So that's the lesson I wanted to teach with this story. I wanted to teach a lesson about second acts, because I really want the writers of this book to learn a lesson about second acts, because second acts are tricky, and this is something I learned from reading Sid Field's screenplay. They are very tricky, and you have to, again, learn how to make them work in order to make your story flow. And this book was, again, really good overall ideas, good overall premise. But the problem is that there's a little bit of bogging down, because this is a second act issue of a overreaching arc. And these are the kind of books that, again, if you don't know what you're doing, can basically cost you sales. So you gotta be able to understand how to make that story move. And this story moves along at an okay pace. It's one I would still recommend you go out here and get, especially if you've invested in the previous issues. But new readers might find this one a bit slower as they look at the previous issues. But this is all part of learning as related to writing, because writing is something that is a bit of a challenge to learn as related to writing not only comics but books and screenplays. But I'm just hoping to give a little bit of advice to the creators if they watch this video. You know, second acts are a challenge, and this one was a good solid one overall. But the whole thing is, you really got to watch how you move a second act, because a second act can be the difference between people moving on with your story or just moving on overall. Now, my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, is available on Lulu.com right now in paperback. And if you want to check out my techniques for writing, you can pick up John Haynes at Death's Door and see how I move a second act very quickly and get readers engaged in a 32-page story. And again, you can find that comic on Lulu.com in paperback right now for the same price as it was on the 2022 Kickstarter. And you can check out my first digital comic, Esteem No Good Deed, which uses the same approach in 9 pages. And you can get that comic for just 99 cents on Amazon.com's Kindle. Or you can pick it up in the Esteem series book, Esteem Blast from the Past. And if you want to check out the books in the SJS Direct universe that are all using my techniques for writing, you can find those books in paperback on Amazon.com, such as the Isis series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, Spellbound, the legendary Mad Matilda and Spinsterella, and you can find other books like Eternal Night and A Recipe for Success. I have a lot of great fiction on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. I also have it available at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you want to see me be able to make more reviews of great comics like Obscura Comics Pumpkin, which you can possibly buy at the Obscura Comics website, I'll leave a link to that so you can go pick up these books. And I go out here and I put in pledges on crowdfunding to support these comics, and I can only do that with your support. If you drop donations to the Patreon, PayPal, or Cash App, I try to pay it forward by supporting other great indie creators so that they can continue making great comics just like Pumpkin. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available on Lulu, John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at Lulu.com today. Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA from the Black Boule in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis Legacy. The sorority secrets of the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis Legacy in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.